Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, all. So today we are walking through the ICOS portal validation. Um, so I'm gonna just talk you through. So the agenda for today is I will be walking through just giving an overview of what ICOS is. I'll give an overview of the ICOS portal validation, walk through the business process, and then focus on the areas that are specific to London market. And then at the end, I will open up the floor for any questions that you might have as well. Okay. So jumping on to the first part of the agenda, which is just giving an overview of ICOS. So again, ICOS stands for the International Claims Orchestration Service. What ICOS is, it holds all claims related information, and this portal would in turn provide the ability to submit new claims of data and also provide the ability to review existing data and documentation. We tend to use this data from other applications within the digital platform service, which stands for DPS. But then also we would be able to validate and augment claims data as well. ICOS will integrate with external service providers to utilize their services, but as well provide the ability to create events or for consumption by supporting services to use common shared services. ICOS is flexible, so it would give the ability to both brokers and carriers to interact regardless of the company's digital maturity as well. There will be greater transparency, so having a central claim record for all parties to review within the ICOS. Consistency is another element that ICOS will be providing to ensure that the platform is for all market to use as well. Okay. Going specifically to the portal now, ICOS portal, as you may know, is a main web-based input interface for claims replacing current tools, and it will be in addition to other inputs such as LimClaim for phase 1 and Accord. Transactions created via these inputs will also be visible within the portal. ICOS will have additional features such as reinsurance, salvage, recovery that will add additional functionalities to the portal, and these will be presented separately. The portal will also be able to include additional attributes that might not be available in other inputs in phase 1. The focus that we're looking at today is around validation. So validation will be included in ICOS portal and will also be replicated in other inputs included in phase 1 as part of the business validation when applicable. So this as well would in turn enhance the technical validation such as the minifield length are covered under the main ICOS portal epic. Okay. So just giving you just a quick overview of the business process. So what would happen is the broker, so the broker starts the journey. So they'll be able to have access to ICOS. They will be presented with the dashboard, and then you go through the different tabs or screens such as policy search. They'll be able to populate transaction information, documentation, capture more policy information, capture the reserves, and then release this information and submit the claim transaction. This will then be, this is where the carrier will begin. They will have log into their portal and review the claim transaction and then respond and then add the reserves. Carriers can also initiate queries to brokers as well, but brokers can only respond. Any documentations will be covered as part of the document management component and not in this epic. So what we're looking at specifically around the validation is we have a set of fields that will be validating around the policy search screens, transaction details, and the policy details. And then once before releasing the claim, we would have a few more fields that we would need to validate for that as well. as well. Sorry, Massimo, do you want to add to that?
No, I was going to just mention, and obviously this presentation is about the validation we're going to do on the portal. So we did a few sessions a few weeks ago on the portal journey for the broker and the journey and the portal journey for the carrier as well. So what Tanisha is summarizing is where the touch point will be from a validation perspective. So if you're not using the portal, the validation would be different in your own systems.
Okay. Right, so the portal validation, so this feature will enhance validations to help assist brokers when creating a new claim transaction. This will ensure that data is captured correctly for at the first instance, and this will facilitate presentation downstream to enable a quicker turnaround and also minimize potential queries. Within the DPS, ICOS integrates with risk, which is IROS, and premium, which is IPOS, to validate data entered. I would like to highlight that in phase 1 only, premium, which is IPOS data, will be used, which will include policy details captured against the premium. So within this portal validation, we would look at the class of business, the risk code, covered insured, period, limits, excess, and the location. And in turn, the outcome will provide either an error message or warning message directly on the screens so that the data can be corrected before the claim transaction is released as well. Okay. So looking at some of the portal and how the error messages would be displayed. So ICOS will display the outcome of the validation directly on the portal to inform brokers and carriers of the errors so that these can be addressed before they can continue with the claim transaction. So this is one of the UI screens that we have. So when a loss date has been populated by the broker and a validation happens, you would see an error message that would be returned when called to IPOS, which is premium. And that would just display that they have checked the premium period, the policy period, and the loss date seems to show that it's outside the policy period. So we would have the error message at the top of the page, and then we'll have another error message that's highlighted underneath the respective data field as well.
Sorry, Darling here. Can I just comment? Do you have a comprehensive list of the error codes at all, or the error or the warnings? Because we're going to factor it all into our testing, and then we haven't got a list of the new ones. I don't know if you have some.
So it's something that we are still collating as well. Yeah.
But we would have for the portal. So is your question about the validation on your systems or the portal ones only?
Well, basically, the portal. What validations can we expect from actioning a transaction somewhere?
Okay, no, that's one that, from a portal perspective, we can definitely provide.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. That's answered my question. Thank you.
No worries. And Kim, you have a question as well?
I appreciate that we are only talking about portal entry and portal viewing here. Will there be further sessions on how this will look? For example, write back messaging and or other methods of data transmission, how that will carry across?
We will have to. So I guess the working assumption is in the current messaging, such as limb claim coming in from a broker or right back from the carrier, will operate as they are. By giving the transition and the size of the changes that we're making, I think it will be definitely beneficial to have a session providing that overview of the validation in there. So from limb claim, we have them documented because they're part of the limb claim messaging standards, and the limb res that will go back with the error messages, and from right back is pretty much the same. But having a session will definitely be beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, I think brokers and carriers alike would like to know. I mean, even if they don't get any additional functionality, will there be any stops? Or, I think they'd like some security around that.
Absolutely, because it will be the same as today, but it would be good to have a session to articulate that and making sure that they are highlighted which one they are today, even if they're not changing.
Brilliant, thank you.
And Steve as well, you got a question?
I have, yeah. So we are just talking about these being warning messages in the portal, right? Not hard stops.
Can I take that, Massimo?
Yep, please.
Yeah. So it's a combination, Steve. So depending on, we're going to have to display some that are going to stop the journey until the broker tends to rectify that error. And then there's some that would be displayed as a warning message. So it's just to make them aware. It's not a blocker, but it's to make them aware that, okay, this is the warning. And then that would be sent over to the carrier to review as well.
I mean, so we use writeback and we put a load of validations like this in our writeback solution, and then we switched them all off at the end because there were too many exceptions to the rules. I'd be very, very uncomfortable if any of these things are hard stops because the data quality is too poor. So until we move to phase 2, when we can rely upon one single source of truth coming from the CDR for things like policy periods and stuff, I don't think we can ever have these as hard stops.
Yeah, the main hard stop we have, Steve, is on the initial screens when in the initial search when the broker will be doing a search on the UMR. So that if there is basically no policy detail, we cannot really start a claim transaction. The rest will most likely just be warning.
Yeah.
That sort of will inform the broker or the carrier of the potential errors, but it will not be a hard stop.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It completely makes sense that you can't set a claim up unless you can pull through the UMR. So that makes sense, I guess.
Okay.
Sorry, it's Andrew Johnson from Matrim here. Just skipping through the slides as well. It looks as though there might be a hard stop on creating a claim outside the policy period. But maybe that's for one we can cover later on.
Yeah, so I will get to so for instance, for the loss date, it's an error because that's when the broker is populating this field. It's a manual entry, and when that validation is going off to check ICOS to just cross-check, is it within the policy period, it will present an error message. But what we're saying is that we'll still give the ability back to the broker to amend that field because it's amendable.
Perfect, thanks.
Yeah. But going back to Steve, so on the policy validation, what we're stating is for any new claim transaction.
Sorry, really, I'm not sure if that is perfect because it could be that there is a loss date outside the policy period that the broker wants to submit it anyway.
So there is a scenario that we could have a loss date outside the policy period.
For which we as a managing agent would deny it, yeah.
Massimo,
or query it.
Yeah, Massimo, I think it's what we spoke about yesterday, that it should be a warning, not an error.
Yeah, it would be a warning. It will not stop the journey from continuing, and yeah.
I mean, it feels like you can't make the portal do something which normal messaging wouldn't do, and so what you don't want is people going, all right, well, if I just put it in as a batch process message, then it will go in and they'll have to actually query it or respond, as opposed to using the portal.
Absolutely. The validation will have to be consistent across all the channels, because otherwise, as you say, you might have one system allowing certain transactions and another wouldn't. But yeah, the policy period, that is definitely just going to be a warning. I think it's the mock-up or the wireframe that we have as a sample showing as a hard stop, but it's not.
Okay, and also just to add to what Massimo said, we do have a field that is loss qualifiers. Within there, we have actual claims made where it will be presented as a warning message if it's outside the policy period. So we do have certain scenarios where the broker would select a qualifier, and then that would go off and check ICOS as well. But then any error or warning message presented back would not stop the journey. It would just be released to the carrier to review. Okay. Yep, I can continue. Okay, so looking at the policy validation, so this is the start of the journey where we're stating that a new claim transaction must have a valid policy detail from premium ICOS for phase 1. What we're stating is when performing a policy search, the following will be entered by the broker. So we would have the bureau field, we would have the carrier field selected, we would have a unique market reference selected, and then the broker contract section reference. We do understand that this will be in IROS only, but what we're stating that when the validation returns from ICOS, the relevant policy details will be available to initiate a new claim transaction. When unsuccessful, an error message will be displayed stating no unique market reference found. So the broker would not have the ability to create a new claim transaction for that. Additional input will have equivalent business validation, and that will be covered separately. Okay. Any questions for this one, or can we continue? Perfect. Okay, so once the UMR has been found, the broker would then be navigated onto the transactions details validation screen. So again, only new claim transactions will use data in risk, IROS, and premium IPOS to populate key claim detail transactions, such as the bureau lead and the slip lead. These will be presented as a selection in phase 2. However, in phase 1, the slip lead will be manually entered because in phase 1, we wouldn't have IROS to validate with. When policy details are validated against premium IPOS for phase 1, the bureau lead will be presented as a selection to choose from. And again, once IROS or risk validation has been enabled, both the bureau lead and the slip lead will be presented as a selection to allow the broker to select their preferred bureau lead or slip lead. Okay. Moving over to the policy and loss details validation, within the policy detail section, new claim transactions will continue to use data in risk and premium to populate key claims transactions details, such as insured, reinsured, period from, period to, sum insured, limits, and excess. In phase 1, policy details will be validated against premium IPOS, and the insured, reinsured, sum insured, limits, and excess will be presented as a selection to choose from, whilst the premium from and to dates will be presented as values and cannot be amended. So these will be displayed as read-only. Okay. For the loss detail section, we would have another set of fields that would need to validate. So to validate, we would have to populate loss details data such as high-level class of business, risk code, loss country, loss date from, and the loss date qualifier. Again, once premium IPOS validation has been enabled, the high-level class of business, risk code, and loss country will be presented as a selection. So again, the broker will have that to select from a drop-down list. And where we have the loss date from and the loss date qualifier is unsuccessful, a warning message will be displayed with the outside policy period. So, and no claim transaction would be created as well. Okay, Andrew?
Yeah, it's not actually related to this policy period point actually, but it's hopefully I'm getting the wrong end of the stick, but it's when you're speaking about the UMR, it's saying that you're going to go against IPOS, and what I'm thinking about are the exceptions where the claims UMR is different to the premium UMR, i.e. a broker commutation's taken place or a broker's gone bust, and for Atrium it's we have a high binder volume, so for us one of them is Corey's. Corey back went bust. So a lot of those UMRs will no longer have the same, will no longer be the same from what was written. Is that going to be an issue? Did you understand the question as well, Ed?
Yes, I was trying to. So what you're stating is you have a UMR for its respective policy, and in turn that has now changed.
That's right, yeah. So the way I think it works on ECF, I'm not really sure, because maybe some people that are closer to DXE might, or Valinetic might know, but you have I think there's some sort of UMR transfer that takes place, or UCR transfer. I'm wondering whether that's going to persist with this.
We might need to take that offline to understand a bit better what the scenario are.
Okay, cool. No worries.
We've taken a note of that, Andrew.
I think it's all covered under the midterm broker changes.
That's what
that
I'm
were brought
thinking,
in.
because that would be
Yeah.
overall
Midterm
what is the
adjustment.
change.
But yeah, I mean, I'm presumably, Andrew, there must be some sort of table sitting behind the scenes somewhere that kind of maps an old UMR to a new UMR if there's a midterm broker change, because otherwise the systems won't allow you to access the bits of data you need to access. So I'm guessing it must work the same, but I don't know.
Yeah,
The
of course.
CDR group are looking at the midterm adjustments and how they're going to work. So that could be incorporated in there. I'd imagine they're covering new UMRs as part of that work.
David, does that include RATC and LPT scenarios as well?
I wouldn't have thought so. They won't be looking at those, no. I mean, they're strictly adhering to the CDR basic setup and how you're administering that as an ongoing risk. I'm pretty sure they haven't gone any further than that yet.
Sorry, can I just ask another quick question? So when you talk about things being presented as a selection, so you talk about high level class of business, risk code and loss country, does that mean the things that the broker can select from are the values that pull through from the ICOS record?
Yes.
Or okay, so loss
Yeah.
country then wouldn't. Loss country would just be a big old list of 250
old
different
list.
countries, is that right?
Yes.
Whereas risk code would be
Specific.
this one's been set up against risk code T. Your selection list is risk code T, and they just pick that one.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Any more questions, or can I proceed? Okay. So for looking at the release details validation, for phase one, what we're stating is when the broker releases the claim transaction, before they release the claim transaction, the following will need to be entered. So that is the original signing number and date, and the additional premium signing reference for declaration only. What we're saying is that if successful, so when a validation goes to is validated from premium ICOS, if successful, the claim transaction will be released to the carrier to review, and if unsuccessful, an error message will be displayed with invalid original signing number and date, and the claim transaction would not be released. So we would give the opportunity back to the broker to amend the OSND and have a revalidation to ensure that it is the right OSND that we have on ICOS as well. Okay. Before jumping to the carrier slides, are there any questions from the broker journey from a portal validation perspective? No. Okay. So looking at the portal validation from a carrier, so once the broker releases that claim, the carrier will be notified of the claim transaction. The carrier will be able to complete required data entry upon submitting a response, and a validation to check premium, ICOS, and IROS will be performed to revalidate the original signing number and date. And if the original signing number and date status has changed to either cancelled or blocked, then the transaction cannot be finalized. So the broker will only be presented with an error message. So that would enable the carrier to query this transaction with the broker. So again, they'll have an error message of the OSND, and they would have the opportunity to query this transaction back with the broker. However, if the OSND number and date status validation is successful, this claim transaction will be released and a notification to the will be sent to the broker regarding the response for this. So again, when the revalidation is taking place, the OSND, a revalidation would happen. If there is a cancelled or blocked on this particular field, it will be presented at the top of the page as well, just to enable the broker, the carrier to query this with the broker.
So how does that work with write back? So if I'm an ECF write back user, I've received my ECF transaction, I've responded to my ECF transaction. So as far as I'm concerned, I've done my bit. How would this, if the OSND has been blocked, how does that then get picked up?
On the write back, I don't believe the same validation on the OSND happens.
It doesn't, no.
Yeah, it's only this one will only be on the portal.
Yeah, so we've got a difference in process then, whether you're a portal user or a write back user, right? In terms of your responsibility.
Because of the validation being different, because obviously from write back there is no cross checking on the premium being blocked.
Yeah, who does this today? The DXE technician.
Yeah, it should be done. It does happen today because there is a validation on the OSND whether it's still valid, because it can change throughout the time the transaction occur.
Yeah, and then it'd be and then it's a DXE transition technician who queries it back to the broker.
Correct.
If they can't then process it, right?
Absolutely. So that is essentially it's preventing that from happening in the first instance. But in this case, yeah, the validation will still be the same because it happens at the end, is just in a different sequence because of the limitation on the write back message. But I agree, we need to formalize how it's going to be, the validation, how it will happen across the two channels.
I don't think I've quite understood. So Steve, are you saying that this should be a validation that happens as part of the TP checks, and therefore this is a warning or error that would show to a DXC technician rather than to the carrier?
Yeah, I'm saying that. So I'm not disagreeing that it's better for this type of thing to be spotted earlier in the process, but the problem we've got is if we got 80% of the market using write back, 80% of the market won't get this validation error. So it would still have to be done by the technical processing step, at the technical processing step. So we'd end up in a difference in process then for portal users who would have to go query this themselves versus write back users who would have the TP doing that. So it feels like there's a little bit of a disjoint in the process there.
Agreed. So let me take it offline and see how we can streamline it. It's possible that this might fall under those additional features that we can only introduce in the portal because we got the flexibility and existing channels remain unchanged, similar to what we do for reinsurance, for instance, or salvage and recovery. It needs to be addressed and it's clearly understood.
Okay.
Just to add to that as well, so my firm Atrium we use CWT messages, which come into us, and we then log into ECF2, which will now be this to in order to then adjust the claims. So I'm presuming that we'd still be notified by the broker that something's been tagged against us. The broker would have provided all information required, but then we would have to do an additional check against the OSND, which we technically should be doing anyway. But so we have the option to so as potentially, as well as being able to query the transaction for the usual like 14 reasons, which I think one of them might be OSND anyway, we could also put cancelled or blocked to it as well. Like, well, is this doing anything in addition to the existing query reasons?
No, essentially, instead of giving the carrier the ability to release the transaction as been agreed without checking the OSND, it will check it beforehand. So then transaction is sort of put on a query status and a query can be initiated.
From what you said there, that I think it looks as though I as the carrier am querying it, that essentially nothing's happening. It's me that has to do it. Is that right?
Yeah, so the query will then be initiated by the carrier, because at the moment the query will be initiated by the technician.
Okay, cool.
So it's essentially shifting that roles and responsibility from the technician to the carrier.
And then just something that I'm sure we'll get to the bottom of is that at the moment we don't on business that we write through LIC, we don't receive the I'm not sure if we receive the OSND for it. We just receive the reinsurance OSND, not the direct OSND that goes to LIC. So there are workarounds to get there. Like I think there's a daily spreadsheet that comes out, but that's extra work for handlers to do.
Yeah, so this validation is not about entering the OSND from the carrier. It just happens automatically.
Yes.
Yeah, so
we need
it's
to
whatever.
validate it. So a claim, yeah. So my policy admin system will have a different OSND for my 609 syndicate than it does for my 5310.
Yeah, so this one will be the OSND on the policy, on the premium. So when the transaction was created by the broker, before it's released by them, it will be validated against a premium OSND. In this one, once then the carrier receives and does the validation and the agreement, at that point, the transaction will be validated again. So without entering any new OSNDs, just to check that the status has not changed. And if that's changed, then obviously some warning messages in there.
Okay, cool. Thanks very much. Thank you.
No worries. And Kim, you have a question as well. I see your hand up.
Yeah. One thing I'm just trying to think this through, so apologies if in conversation it turns out that I'm worrying about nothing. But one thing that concerns me about even sequencing of things being done differently, portal versus write back, for example, and I think it might be a bigger danger for Lloyds, because you can have a first and second both required to agree the same transaction. If you've got those things not happening at the same time, is there a danger that one part of it can be agreed and will then be in the system to be queried, whereas another would never get through the gates? I don't know if there's any danger in that. It doesn't feel quite right.
Yeah. What I would like to do, I would like to take this offline to understand how the sequencing happens for write back, because essentially the transaction, if the OSND has changed the status and it's cancelled or blocked, at the end the transaction cannot proceed. So the main difference here is when is this catched, in whether it's at the release from the carrier or later on downstream. But because of the variation between the write back and the portal, I think I need to take it offline before I come back to you, giving you one answer, and then it's valid throughout.
I think Kim's right insofar as you could have a leader, a second agreement party, and exchanging TP, all processing something, and at any point in the time delay between those three parties doing their thing, the status of the OSND could change. So I think that's why it's always been the backstop is TP does it, and only TP does it, because they can't push the thing through to settlement if the OSND status has been cancelled. Yeah. So I think that's why it sits there now. But I think we should look at this one.
Take it offline, because TP will only be for Lloyd's transactions. So if the transaction, I guess it's for the other bureaus, there is no TP. So this will be caught at some stage, but I need to understand at what stage and what would happen if there are different transactions being executed.
Yep.
Okay. And that comes us to the end of the walkthrough, but we can always have additional questions from this. Massimo?
Questions open to the floor, so if you guys have more questions.
Yes, sorry, I'm just once more getting hung up on something that I don't understand, and it's I'd
So
just share it with the group, maybe if anyone knows. But how would you know if the OSND status has changed to cancelled or blocked? How do we know that?
So initially when the broker manually inputs this OSND, we're sending a validation to check the premium IPOS, and then that would check what the broker has populated to confirm what we have on the premium. And then when that claim transaction has been released to the carrier, when they continue to check and complete the required data entries before they press a response, we're expecting ICOS to have a revalidation of that to make sure that the carrier is working on the latest status of that. So oftentimes the broker would send through an OSND, but then it could change by the time the carrier decides to review this transaction. So we just want to make sure that we're working on the latest status, or the carrier is.
Right, perfect. So that's an automated thing that gets checked.
In the back end, yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Sorry, I got
Yeah.
a bit confused.
And so
And
can we just follow that through to the end then? So does that mean that and this is for Lloyd, so apologies, Kim. But does that mean that technical processing, whether it be a manual process or an automated process, will carry out that one check for a final time before agreeing the transaction?
Yes.
Because that's what happens now. So we've got that backstop in the digital processing service. That's
in the
going to
portal,
stay,
yes.
is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
that will stay. So they will stay unchanged.
So then the question we were working through earlier around what happens if the status of that OSND changes between the lead and the second looking at it, is pretty academic, isn't it? Because finally that one last check where people have done their part, that one final check is going to be the TP, and so nothing will go through. So we've got the backstop guard in place.
Correct. Yeah, that is currently already there. So we're just moving it a step earlier before it even reaches TP.
Yeah, no, I get that, and that makes complete sense. I'm a little bit concerned that we're going to have two separate kind of processes in place, or roles and responsibilities in place, depending on whether you're a portal user or a write-back user.
Or a write-back.
That's not ideal, and will invariably lead to confusion. So that's my concern here, but I'm comfortable that there's a backstop control in place.
Okay. Any more questions on validation or on the portal in general?
Yeah, Massimo, I was going to just ask the group, I guess, we've got the kind of higher level, just as Janine framed it, around, potentially slightly different processes. Are there any other kind of broader themes, questions, concerns that people have? I think it's not necessarily to put you on the spot to answer them all, Massimo, but just curious to test with the group, like, what are people worried about? What, and that might help us then for future sessions. We can try and head off any of those. So it's a bit of a question out to everyone if there's any other general topics that people want to raise.
I've got one. There's been a lot of noise about where and when sanctions checking is taking place. Would you class this as validation, or is this some other form of check? And where's it done and who's it done by?
We have not included the sanction checks as part of the validation because we treat them separately. So we can send the detail when they happen.
Okay.
There are 5 main points when they happen, and then what is also sent for sanction checks. So those ones they're documented, so we can send them out if there is confusion or unclarity.
But Massimo, that's only the exchanging sanctions check process.
Correct.
For your own,
that's
for your
the
own purposes, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. So there's just Velanetics making sure they're not breaching the sanction by processing something. That's not, to your point, David, it's not what a managing agent should be doing from their sanction checking perspective first, before they decide whether they're even pushing the button on ECF or
Well,
not.
I mean, DXC have obligations obviously to their parent for sanction checking, but other than that, I mean, it should come back to the carrier as to whether or not they're going to pay the claim or they're going to note it as sanction check. I mean, it's their risk. If they want to pay it, then sure, it's down to them and their responsibility.
Sorry,
Yes, so I don't think ICOS would stop. ICOS doesn't enforce a carrier to do any sanctions check-in, and it doesn't prevent them from doing any sanctions check-in outside of what they would normally do in their own systems. So yeah, if as a carrier you think I'm going to pay this Cuban claim, and you push agree, that however won't stop DXC from saying we can't do that, and because they will sanction check it at that stage themselves.
Correct. So there's different checks between you would do as a carrier, as a broker, compared to what Velonetic will do within our platform. Yes.
So Elliot, I think for me, in answering the question that you asked about what might you think about doing differently or building into some of these sessions, it is really about that highlighting, flagging for us where there is that divergence in roles and responsibilities between the portal and write back users. So where there is a change such as this, then I think it would be really, really helpful in these sessions if that could be highlighted so that we don't have to sit and kind of muse through whether or not there is a change. Changes in roles and responsibilities should be flagged and talked about in conjunction with these walkthroughs.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks, Janine.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Or... Okay. If there's no more questions, happy to close the call a bit early and give you some time back. If you do come up with questions later on, feel free to get in touch. We do have weekly surgeries session now, so we can always take them later on and answer them offline.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nisha, Massimo, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.